I give talks from time to time on the healing power of love, you know, and from 33 years in the cancer help program, I just have to say that the healing power of love is to me the greatest healing power, you know. And of course, there's so many forms of love, right? You know, but the Sufis have a saying which I just love, which seems to me very deep. The friend with a small f leads to the friend with a big F. The friend with a big F being the divine. And one of the paths to healing is when we see the eternal in another human being, you know, when we have that experience. And I have found in my own life that meditation has been a harder path to the eternal than, you know, deep friendship or love, where I can access the eternal through another actual human being, you know.
And Steve and Andrea Levine have spoken so eloquently about that in their books and in their talks. Yeah.
And I recently witnessed something very extraordinary. I had a friend with a long history of totally debilitating chronic illnesses of the kind that you work with all the time and or did work with in your practice. I'm sure Chris does. And this friend rediscovered her birth religion, which was Christian, but at a very deep level, you know, at a very deep level. And there was a profound shift in her complex chronic issues. And what I began to put together, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in China, there is a tradition, it's a sub-tradition of what's called virtue healing. It's when it was like an 18th century monk who was very compassionate about all the poor people who couldn't afford the acupuncture and the herbs and all that stuff. And so he began to take people in and just allow them or help them get back to the core of virtue in their lives. And there was a point at which in this process, most of them would vomit, you know, vigorously as they purged themselves of the ways of being that had not been helpful to them. And so I began to connect that, and there were all kinds of people, and that's a contemporary who also does this, all kinds of people with cancer and many other difficult who recovered, you know? So I began to put that together with the fact that at Lourdes, you know, the miracle cures at Lourdes, which are virtue healings. You know, people go to Lourdes, believers go to Lourdes, or some non-believers, and as you know, the Catholic Church has an extraordinarily impeccable way of reviewing, quote, miracles at Lourdes. It's one of the most systematic in the world. And there are people who had metastases to the bone, where the bone heals up, you know. So in terms of the healing power of love, to me, when you can connect deeply to another human being, but when the friend leads to the friend, and it leads you to the divine, in whatever form that is, I find in all the different traditions, in the Asclepian healing traditions of Greece, where people stayed in the Asclepian centers waiting for a dream that would whisper to them what their path was, and in the miracles from Christ onward in the Christian tradition with Lourdes, and, you know, in all the different traditions, this amazing grace that sometimes people not only transform their relationship with life and death so that they no longer fear death, right? But sometimes they actually recover in an astonishing way. And I don't say it's frequent, but it seems to me it's not an either or, it's a continuum. And so what I have seen an infinite number of times in 200 cancer help programs is lots of people who don't recover necessarily, but they outlive their prognoses by decades, you know? And so often it seems to me that whatever else is going on, that they reconnected with the healing power of love and with their own inner sense of what right life is. What is your experience with those things?
I was just actually thinking about my most favorite story about this is I was seeing a woman for a number of years who had multiple sclerosis, kind of at a median stage, and was trying to avoid some of the more toxic therapies. And we got her a little inflatable hyperbaric chamber that she could use at her house, and she would use that periodically. But, you know, I was just seeing the neurological picture deteriorate over a period of years. And then she didn't come in, and I didn't see her for, 4 or 5 years. And she showed back up one day, and she looked fabulous. I said, okay, what'd you do? She said, well, my old high school boyfriend showed up. And she said he had been married and divorced, and you know my story, my significant other left me 4 years ago, and we've kind of hooked up. And she said, ever since we got back together, I've just been getting better and better. Yeah. So okay, great.
Yeah, those stories are extraordinary. Ian Gawler had the Australian guy who did cancer work, and it's controversial, but he had a story of one of his patients who was in a bad marriage and had a bad cancer and retreated to her beach house on the coast, leaving her family behind with a case of sherry, and just got out of a bad marriage and drank sherry and did really well. And then there are the whole set of metastatic cancer recovery cases in Japan of poor farmers who didn't have the money for any surgery or anything else, but they just surrendered their lives to God. And a whole set of them, So I think what we're both saying is that we've talked about the health promoting practices, and then we can and will talk about all the complex things. But at the same time, beyond the health promoting practices, it's just this contact with love or the divine, and it's either human or divine forms or both, and just the infinite power of that to heal. Yeah.
And actually going back to my story, one little snippet. So after my original, when the first metastatic lump appeared in 1997, one of the first things that I did besides doing the detox and stuff was I went out and bought a sailboat and started spending a lot of time sailing on the bay, because I'd always loved sailing, and I had done it when I was younger, and just went and got a little 26-foot boat that I could also do little weekend trips on and stuff, and that was a part of my healing as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, something about that, because I've been thinking about the healing power of love a lot, because I'm about to give a talk on it in Houston at the Jung Institute. Ooh. And one of the things I often think about it is that when there's the transcendent experience of falling in love, like your patient, there is this sense of connection not only to the individual, but you're seeing the universal through the individual. But then what happens is you actually start living together, and you run into all the human realities of living with another person. And therefore, very often that transcendent experience dissipates or disappears completely, and there can be a great sense of disappointment about that. So what are the forms of love that don't disappear that way? And so sailing is a great example, but nature, pets, it doesn't disappear with pets. It doesn't disappear with passionate hobbies or things that one, deeply loves. Relationship with music or whatever it is, art, whatever it is. So the cultivation of forms of love that will not disappoint you. I mean, human love can be transcendent, but then it becomes problematic so often. And so what are the forms of love that keep you in relationship with, the divine. It's a very interesting
Yeah,
thing.
and I absolutely believe that not only is it important to stay connected with that, but also to learn new forms of artistic expression as well, because there are now studies that show that helps to prevent age-related cognitive deficiencies like
Right.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I'm currently learning jazz guitar, which is awesome.
Whoa, how amazing.